just begun to play our part. This is the time we form the chorus. Lift your voice for those before us. We can rely on one another. Feel the pride, let's show our colors. We are heroes and dreamers. We are restless believers.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. This is Gail of Gaia, and this is Free Range, where we graze on wild ideas, and we have wonderful guests. And today, I have a wonderful guest known as SGAnon. He's very well known, so let me bring him on. Hi, SG.
Greetings. Glad to be back.
Welcome, welcome. I'm happy about what we're going to talk about today, because I think it's an area that many people are not that aware of. And we're finding out that because of the original corporate construct of the United States, when they changed all that in 1871, we come to find out that everything is corporate. Basically. So would you expand on that? Because I think we need to educate our audience a little bit about that.
Well, we're going to try and I think unpack a topic today that's going to be extremely large. And for the audience out there, this would be the opportunity that I would take a breath of fresh air, maybe grab a glass of water, because what we're going to unpack is essentially what is a legal fictitious government. With the agents and principles and all of those sorts of business terms and financial terms and things like that, which would tie into something like a corporate entity. Our founders actually set us up for a system that was impervious to this. It was an impregnable system. We were founded as a republic based on a trust. And many of these topics out there for the audience, I think, are going to be first time issues. So let's go way back and really talk about the basis of how we arrived where we arrived. Between the late 18th century, right around the conclusion of the American Revolution, the time of the founding of the Republic of the United States, and the Civil War, we had a continuous infiltration operation running to attempt to destroy the union of sovereign republics that formed the Union of these United States of America. If we go back to our original history, we have to remember that the states themselves agreed to become part of a union only insofar as to govern interstate commerce and trade and national defense. They needed a union that would provide the scaffolding for disputes to be managed for a broader defense against foreign invasion should that ever arrive against a member of the union. But the states themselves were designed as basically tiny little countries, sovereign republics. They have their own constitutions. They were referendumed into the union, right? The process of accession into the union dealt directly with the will of both the states and the populations of the territories. So you had we the people in an individual populist manner, but you also had governing authorities, which in those territories by and large reflected in the early days the direct extension of we the people in a public servant format. So you had pretty much a synchronous agreement to accede to the union or not. Post U.S. Civil War, and the destruction or the near destruction of this union of these United States, we were placed into a debt slave system. All of us were incorporated into a business entity, a walking entity that is lifeless in many regards, right? That's why we sign things nowadays in black ink instead of pre-world or pre-Civil War, where legal documents were always signed in red. Your blood ran red if you were a living being. In nowadays time, and it has been this way for quite a long time, we sign these legal documents in black and blue because we're not living beings. We're either hypoxically alive in some sort of zombified state, or we're considered dead entities. And this gets into a really it sounds almost theoretical or conceptual in some regards. So we have to step back and breathe and unpack this slowly. So the corporation system that was put into place post-Civil War was offset by a trust that Abraham Lincoln established towards the conclusion of the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln, a complex man in his own right, had really no idea what he was getting into. He was very out of his depth in the presidency. But towards the end of the Civil War, he established a trust for the 35 at the time, the 35 sovereign republics, the states that comprised the Union of these United States. That trust was overruled and put into the background essentially by the actions of the Ulysses S. Grant administration in 1871. Now, the Ulysses S. Grant administration was up against the debtor class, or excuse me, the banking class from Europe at that time, which was the British Crown Registry, their banking clan, which was the Rothschild banking dynasty. And they had a significant amount of infiltration that had been accomplished here in the Union of the United States during that Civil War period. And of course, the United States itself was essentially bankrupted beyond broke. That war actually drained essentially all wealth from the U.S. Financial system. And the only way that we were able to prop up the economy and not descend into complete anarchy and chaos and be overcome by a foreign invasion force was for the Grant administration, post the days of Johnson, concluding that Civil War, to sign this agreement called the Organic Act of Colombia of 1871. We agreed to take these funds from these individuals during the Johnson administration, but as essentially a guarantee or a surety, depending on the term. And I'm not a financial advisor, but just to convey the meaning, there was a guarantee put in place, which was the Organic Act of Colombia. And what that did was it established corporate control. It established a corporate business entity that was owned by the Companies House and the London Accredited Registry and the British Accredited Registry out of England at the time. It established a business entity 10 mile by 10 mile, I believe it was, square, and that's known now as the District of Columbia. So they incorporated the capital city that had been built towards the late 18th century around the time of the first and second presidencies. So once that city became a corporate entity, it became foreign. It was no longer subject to United States laws. It had no original jurisdiction over the populations or any of the territories of the United States of America. But how they circumvented that was in 1868, 3 years prior to this act. I forget which amendment it was. I think it was the 14th Amendment. It may have been the 13th. Forgive me on my history there. Yeah. But it turned the American population from American sovereigns, American nationals, into U.S. citizens. And the corporation government, of course, that they named the Washington, D.C. swamp was the United States, the corporation government of the United States. You can actually find the United States Inc. In internet searches, if you're very diligent about it, listed in Companies House in London. And that gets us into a topic for Trump for later, because Trump actually bankrupted this corporate entity.
Yes.
So coming back to our timeline here, so this is how the corpocracy started, right? This is how the true takeover of the United States system, the total enslavement of the United States peoples, the sovereign beings of the United States. You are a living man. You are not a U.S. citizen, right? This is how this process began. They turned everything into a corporation. Our birth certificates are printed in all capitalized. They're certificates of deposit, essentially, against our lifespan. They're traded on markets that we don't have access to. If you sign your name on a document, it's in a recognized according to the different codes of law out there, and there's several that apply here under contract law, but black and blue signing is recognized as the signature of a corporation or a dead entity. A corporation is not a living entity. So they have turned all of us under the system into a presumed dead entity, and they turned the government, our government structures around us, into business entities that had control of the business capital, which of course is us. So moving through the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this process was really codified into stone and put on afterburner with the erection of the Federal Reserve Act, that Federal Reserve System, and of course the ATF, the IRS, and the FBI, which are agents of the corporation, right? These agencies acquired, because corporations are entitled to do mergers and acquisitions, they acquired all of the different component intersections of society under their bureaucratic agencies, and then the corporate governance over top of those agencies acquired and merged within those agencies, right? These are all business movements that occurred within the United States government system, and the facade was placed in front of us, and the facade was given to us in a couple of different masterful ways. Number one, they had near total control of all information. From the time of the Gutenberg printing press, all of the way forward to the present day, the control of information has laid with the Vatican and the various financial entities at the very, very top of society, transcending governments for hundreds of years, and indeed controlling monarchies, including the English monarchy, gaining control of them in the 17th century. These entities had essentially total control of the flow of information. They owned newspapers. They owned all emerging technologies. They owned all of the patents for all emerging technologies. Anything that was business oriented that came out of Europe in those days was influenced or affected, usually owned by a member or members of these various familial dynasties that controlled worldwide finance. So anything, excuse me. So anything that allowed for the emergence of new capability was monitored and throttled and immediately intercepted by this group because of the level of business control and finance control that was consolidated in Europe between the 17th century and the late 19th century. So they were able to pull this off then because all of those spaces of society, including our flow of information, were subservient to the corporation. They were subservient to the various business entities, the various levels of interested parties, right? And they were never subservient to the sovereigns of the land. They were never subservient to the inheritors of the land, which would be those American nationals that unwittingly became subjects of the corporation. Because when you take away your sovereignty status and you agree to become a citizen of an entity or a citizen of a jurisdiction or a domain, you are agreeing to accept the grantor of the citizenship's authority over you. And this is one of the ways that they've tricked us, right? And so they kept this facade up with this control of information. We were led into multiple world wars, which shifted the geopolitical balances of power around the world. Those wars also served to erase a tremendous amount of our history, to allow for an incredible exportation and expatriation of antiquity of mankind into the halls of the Vatican, various secret banking institutions, tunnel systems around the world, etc. And so really for the last 150 years or so in world history, we don't have a good concept of who we are. We don't have a good understanding of what government actually is, how government actually works, right? We've been faced with trying to blend within our mentality and within our understanding these concepts of corporation and business behavior, the behavior of a corporation no different than McDonald's or Walmart, and try to intersect that in our consciousness with the concept of law. And if you go back to the Magna Carta, excuse me, which is a document that came out in 1215 and essentially reined in the absolute monarchical power of the king in those days. The document states, and this is what made it so revolutionary, that the law comes from the people. So you can't actually have a system of governance where law, true authority and true functionality of right and wrong can be blended with a system that is based entirely on business gain. It's based entirely on the transmutation from the living to the dead. That's what a business entity does. It converts value in the world, right? It's a part of value exchange. This is not to say businesses are bad, but it is to say that the primary aim of business is to convert natural material, to convert the living into a transaction, right, of some sort. And that often yields a greater transaction, or a greater gain for the living on the other side of that, right? When we offer service in one another, we do so at a standard rate. Everything is agreed upon. Good faith is exacted. We choose to place trust in one another. And then services or products are circulated around. And so that produces a net gain to society. But in that process, there is an energetic transaction, what I would call a spiritual transaction, that happens. And that is why they chose the system that they did, because changing our sovereign spiritual law, our unalienable rights as living beings, over to a transactional or dead being basis was the major focus, the major point of all of this. It's what allowed the extrapolation of various case law that's been passed in corporate court systems to begin governing, the corporate systems itself, because the corporation behaves only in response to its own legal department, right? If we were to keep with the aim of that. And the other thing that it does is it allows for the expansion of power in such a way that it cannot be spiritually balanced. And that's what this deep state cabal, what this locus of control of society at the very top for the last several hundred years has always, always, always been about.
Yes, and when it's a corporate nature, you are not able to identify the people very easily who are responsible for whatever happened that wasn't good, that you wanted to change or whatever. Um, so, we can talk about Vanguard, we can talk about BlackRock, but who are the people behind all that? That's what's frequently missing. And then, besides that, one of the things that I wanted to point out, when we go to court, we're treated as that dead entity. And if you say otherwise, they threaten you with jail. I can say this, I've had it happen. But because you can say I'm not that all capital name that you have. That's not me. And they say, well, if it's not you, I guess you can go to jail. That's what I was told in Nevada. So anyway, that kind of thing does exist, but I think it's important that people realize that everything's for profit, even in our courts.
Well, the courts are the guarantors of the longevity of the corporation, which is what makes it such a vile fraud. This is really, I think, the most vapid part of the entire discussion, is that the law itself has been weaponized to disempower and destroy the law. And so the situation you just described, right? If you're an agent of a business and you have no idea that you've been employed or contracted by this business, if someone comes to you and says, hey, why are you working for XYZ Contracting? You're obviously going to say, well, I'm not, and you're crazy. And so that's how they've managed to keep us divided against one another in those same circumstances, right? Because within our communities, I think we have some individuals who are absolutely corrupted, bought off, and paid for. Some individuals have absolutely drank the poison juice and eaten from the poison tree. But we have others who are attempting to serve society in the ways that they have been taught. And so the teaching component and the maintenance of that facade that we talked about just a moment ago is why this is so important. Most people have no idea that there are multiple different jurisdictions of law that can be enacted in a society. What we have been exposed to for the last 150 plus years has been essentially a combination of maritime and admiralty law. Maritime law is the law of the dock. Admiralty law is the law of the high seas. Both of them are business law. Both of them are corporate law, because they have corporeal control over everything that occurs, right? If you join the pirate ship, you are at the pirate ship's discretion. They make the law. You don't get to make the law. The same is sort of true in the understanding of how maritime and admiralty law combine in a militarized sense, and the types of law that was employed by the British between the early 18th century and the late 19th century to subjugate essentially 2/3 of the world's main supply chains and groups and control most of the 7 seas of the earth. So this same weaponization of law, right, in a mental sense, not being told or taught the full truth, being trained essentially as automaton robots to enforce a particular angle, but being allowed enough discretionary fodder in the middle and enough power and comfort to feel like they're doing some of it themselves, and maybe they're making a difference in society. And occasionally the fraudulent system does catch a real bad guy, right, a real doer. These types of things provide the basis for our own countrymen, our own community neighbors, if we want to call it that, to be the agents for our own enslavement. And the problem is a great deal of them have no idea that they're doing so. So there has to be, I think, as we transition back to a republic, there has to be this opportunity for mercy. There has to be this opportunity for understanding given, because education has to be given. Awareness has to be imparted. Knowledge has to be attained. One of the main tenets of common law, if we were going to go back to raw constitutionalism, is this idea that the jurors must finally consider the gravity of the punishment in relation to what it may produce for the living man or the living woman that has committed harm. What level of punishment is needed to properly indemnify the other party, because it's not about getting vengeance. It's not about extracting as much as you can from that living man or woman that has committed some sort of wrong, has violated the social compact, has violated the common law agreement between us. It's about indemnifying those who have been harmed, those who have lost, making them whole again. So mercy itself has to factor into all decisions made as we transition everything back. I think that there's a great opportunity out there, quite frankly, to convert the same courts that you just referenced a moment ago in Nevada into agents for we the people, but it has to be done in such a way that they're presented with the cold hard truth. They're given a dispassionate opportunity and a dispassionate time period to absorb that truth, to acquiesce to we the people, to expand upon their understanding of the law as agents and officers of the law, and then to enforce the law as it is supposed to be enforced. We live in a corporate business system. The laws that are enforced within the corporation reflect only the whims and the desires of those controlling the corporation. Everyone else, all of the way down, is simply a useful idiot, and they often find themselves subject to the same laws and sort of seen out the door in that same respect when they've when they've run out their usefulness to those individuals at the very top. That is a converted system, and the law as we know it has to be fundamentally changed from a concept and a pragmatic application basis, or we're never going to arrive here in the world to the point of true justice and balance, which I think after the last 5 years is what everybody wants more than anything else.
Oh, definitely. And another thing I just want to throw in there is that it's like when I first started saying, no, I'm not a U.S. citizen, people got really upset. They thought I wasn't a patriot. I wasn't, because they didn't understand. They didn't know. And trying to explain, which you're doing a wonderful job of, it was difficult because that makes you their corporate slave, basically. So all of that is something to take into consideration. I became an American state national in order to attempt to remove myself from the corporate construct. However, the policing agencies, law enforcement still operates like they always have. And these traffic violations or registration or different things like that shouldn't put somebody in jail or get handcuffed or anything of that nature. But based on this weaponized system against we the people, that's what's happening. I've heard a lot of people who have lost their vehicles, for example, especially this state's great for that. That's theft of property, but they can do it because of this corporate nature of the courts.
Indeed. And the corporate nature of the courts helps to reinforce the corporate money-changing operation that is the entire purpose of the existence of any business entity. Any business entity's design is to maximize money generation, but also, I think, to do so in an ethical way. There's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with that process, but it is a delicate balance between principle and ethic and morality, right? There has to be a point of interchange where the protection of the individual and the sovereign is maximized and the ability to maximize value exchange is protected and preserved to the greatest extent possible. But if we were going to sacrifice one, we would obviously sacrifice the capability of value exchange over the diminishment and the enslavement and the capitalization of the sovereign as a life form, essentially, that the sovereign is not. And so looking at how that system works, right? Understanding how the monetary commercial part of it, how the trafficking component of that, right? Because we can get into things like Sustakv trusts, things that they've opened in our names, that they've traded in our name in the background. These types of issues provide us the basis to understand that we are part of a money-generating organization. We're part of a money-generating matrix machine. And so all of us within that machine, when we register our property with the government, we're giving the business ownership of the property. It's no different than an employee registering one of their personal items with the corporation that they work for so that they're allowed to keep it at work. Because if they don't register an account for the personal property that they bring to work within the corporation business, subject to the corporation bylaws, then they're not allowed to bring that, right? They're not allowed to have that. You can actually be turned out of the corporation for doing things like that. So there is a distinct separation between personal sovereign ownership, personal sovereign identity, and the identity of both ownership over our bodies, so the identity of our body, and ownership over our personal property, when we choose to intersect with the corporation. And this is where it gets really hard, I think, for a lot of people to keep following along, because the obvious statement is, I had no idea. I wouldn't have done that if I'd known. It's not, the this is karmically out of balance. And some of that, I believe, is absolutely true. But we have to look, I think, at the true nature of things. Is ignorance of the law an excuse, for example? Is not knowing the laws of another nation a good enough excuse to suspend that nation's law enforcement efforts were you to commit a crime that you didn't know you were committing? The same type of argument applies here. When we have chosen, even though we chose so without informed consent, even though we didn't know what we were doing, when we exercise that free will, and we participate in that system, and we register our vehicle, and we do the various business and financial transactions, and we open these accounts and things of that nature, and we do economic business according to their tax code and their tax laws, we are giving them essentially the essence of our consent for them to extract from us everything that a business entity can and should extract. And so there is, I think, a component of activism that has to sort of come with we the people on this issue. It doesn't have to be a chaotic response. It doesn't have to be, oh, I'm never going to pay this anymore. Oh, I'm never going to participate in that anymore. But there has to be a component of action where we leverage the law as it is written against the corporation to the greatest degree possible, because they are subject to their own corporate law. So we can leverage that against them to help encourage the reformation, or help to further, maybe is a better way to put it, the reformation of our landscape from a business dead corporate entity into a law of the land living sovereign entity.
Yes, that's what we
a way
need.
to do that is to hold them accountable, right? We can utilize their corporate law to hold them accountable to some degree. We can also exercise other components of contract law, such as trust law, to establish, jurisdictional basis for enforcement and authority, things of this nature. But all of that occurs in a process, I think, that has to be offered in patience and grace, because so many of us out there are just serving at the behest of the corporate machine. We've been doing so for years. We had no idea what we were doing. And when given the opportunity, even though we may not like being publicly shamed, we'll go home and we'll look in the mirror and we'll come back and actually acquiesce to the we the people side. And I think therein lies the idea of God's mercy here in the world.
Yes, that's a good way of looking at it. I just think it's so important that people become aware of this, because it's a system that's been being used against them, especially in the courts. I mean, you go to the court and you get done with your little whatever it is, and what do? The first thing you do is you go to the payment window, because you've been fined or you've had something, and frequently it's over very petty things, but sometimes it's not. And then we have issues about how is evidence gathered and how much care is taken in that, and who establishes some of these very, very lengthy sentences. For example, in Arizona, there's no such thing as good time. And I think they're doing great damage to people with these lengthy incarcerations. I mean, how many people do we have incarcerated in the United States? Far more than all the other industrial countries combined. And why is that? It's because they're making money off the American people through the weaponized justice system. And I find that very disturbing, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up. I know that Anna von Reitz is working on establishing grand juries and common law, getting back to common law, where the people are in charge, not the judges. The judges here are really just administrators. Would you agree with that?
Well, indeed, because when we look at a corporate judiciary, right, a corporate legal department, you have a legal director, a vice president, right, and then you have a team of attorneys or a team of legal representatives, public relations specialists, things of that nature that pan out from that corporation legal department and ensure that the entirety of the corporation's bylaws are enforced to the greatest degree possible, understanding that each department, each division, so to keep with our example, each incorporated state of the United States is going to operate with some of their own internal policies. And that's the same process that we've seen now. We've not had the law of the land, the law of the living being enforced in this country in a very long time. Yes. And that is because we've had the weaponization of the judiciary and the legal system And that, of course, began with education. These people have owned all textbooks going back several hundred years. Do we really want to have the intellectually immature position to think that they would teach us everything in those textbooks? Having control of the presses, having control of the publishing companies, having control of the groups that bring research and breakthroughs to the fore, philosophical debates, etc., being able to amplify or de-amplify your own choice of narrative and information, that's what they're all about, and it's what they've been all about for a very long time. So we have judges, attorneys, officers of the court at all levels around our nation that are operating as agents of a business entity, some of them consciously so, but a great majority of them having no idea that that's what they're doing. Having no idea that they're enforcing a punitive law system that is inverse and really antithetical and opposed to the common law, the sovereign law system that the founders envisioned. They knew that this is how the business enslavement of Europe had been accomplished. They knew that corporations existed within the governments of Western Europe and within the United Kingdom in those days. They understood that the weaponization of law, the weaponization of this exchange of law between person to person, man to woman, living person to living being, they knew that that weaponization was how they had conned the entirety of the population of Europe in those days into the subservience position that they had been conned into for several hundred years. These were enlightened thinkers. They understood the basis of the infiltration. They understood the basis of how these things happen. And unfortunately, we were only able to stave that off here in the United States of America in the early days for a short period of time. The sheer power of world finance in those days, coupled with the power of the British Royal Navy and the British Red Army and the ability of the British Crown to throttle trade and commerce, to control supply chains and the activities of the high seas in those days, we were just in a position where we were a nation too early. We attempted to come and overtake that field, and we got a great deal of progress at first, but that progress was encroached upon and then overtaken by the time of the U.S. Civil War. And we've been living in the post period, the occupation period of a foreign corporation ever since that period of time. Why do we think the erosion of our way of life has been so continuously in one direction for 150 years? That's statistically impossible. That means that there has to be a driving force that is pushing a particular direction on the machinations of society, right? Because the course of human events throughout history, when you take the throttle off of a civilization, that civilization typically flourishes and it has its ebbs and its flow periods, and it doesn't really make a lot of logical sense, but in a historic fashion, it makes relative sense to the development of that civilization. But when you put in control arms, you can govern how a civilization progresses, and that's exactly what we've had happen to us here in the United States of America. And our judges, just like our police precincts, just like our sheriff department precincts, just like our municipalities, are the agents of the law at all levels. They are part of that grand subjugation of civilization, and they have no idea in a great many cases that that's what they're doing.
That's what's amazing to me too, because one of the things that I can just see just by thinking about it, it's my understanding that, for example, law enforcement, they have incentives, they have quotas, so it's to their advantage. This is the business nature of it coming through, because we need so many people in the jail system, because so much money is made in that system, as well as by the, as I understand it, the judges and the prosecutors, to some extent too, by the judges, for example. And I have to say this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they get a percentage, a significant percentage of whatever fine they impose. And the bonds that they put up on for different things are outrageous. And I'm assuming that this is how they're going into our trusts and so on. All of this needs to be unpacked and have people have a true understanding of what's really going on. And why it should change. It's like you said too, the training has been from a corporate standpoint, not from a we the people standpoint.
Well, it sort of is, I think it's analogous in some regards to the example that if you were to go into a business entity and say, show me your training materials, those training materials would only govern activities, actions, policies, and internal procedures and protocols for that business entity. Those materials would not cover various issues pertaining to customers, right? They would only pertain to customers when those customers are inside the business entity. So in other words, it would pertain to the customer's presence within the jurisdiction of that business. But once the customer exits that jurisdiction, those training manuals are no longer applicable. The same is true here in the world, right? When we consider law school is a formal training process for the world's largest business entity. It is not a true training process in the preservation of what law itself is, right? There are a number of different kinds of law out there. You have nature's law, the laws of the universe, such as things like Newton's laws and other physics breakthroughs, and that is up for discussion in some regards. But then you get down into contract law, maritime law, common law, admiralty law, and the only one of those three that yields an accession and an ascendant path towards nature's law is common law, is constitutional sovereign law, right? And that's what the founders envisioned and enshrined. That's what they understood to be the defining difference between the system that the British Crown had erected in the early days of the colonies and the system that actually needed to happen to ensure true freedom, true liberty for sovereign beings everywhere. And it had to be a shift in the type of contract law that was being administered, right, in all of the colonies at that time. And we were able to break away from that for a little while, and we trial ran it really well, but it was overtaken and placed in a subservient state once again post that Civil War period. And from that point until the present day, we have been operating essentially under a legal facade.
Isn't that amazing too, when you think about it? And that's why we have people where there's no victim, no crime. And we have people like that in jail, and that shouldn't be. And then there's the aspect of, as much as I've been told, $6,000 a day for every inmate. So it's a multi-billion-dollar operation that is being maintained because the people are not awake to what's really going on. Because if they really knew, they would make sure we got this changed. And that's why I have some of the shows I have, is because I know I've done a lot of research in my life, and and this system is very weaponized against the people, and it's concerning. So I'm anxious to see it change. It just kind of shows how they have been going after a Trump with a vengeance. They can pull out all kinds of stops that we're not even aware of until they do, and then it takes other attorneys. Our system should not be so complicated that your average person can't defend themselves, for that matter. But right now, if you try to go into court to do that, the cards are already stacked against you, so to speak, and you really won't get. You'll be lucky if it happens the way you would like it to, because it still depends on whoever the judge is, whoever the prosecutor is. Things like that shouldn't matter. And I think one of the things that happened is we call these people our public officials. They are public servants, not officials. And I think Mikki Klann emphasized that with what she did with the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. Did you see that, SG?
Indeed, I did. And it reminds us, I think, of the immense power that we have when we step outside of the business entity, when we walk out the front door and we operate in the law of the land, the law of the living, the law of the sovereign being, and the inheritor of these United States of America. And that's what all of us are. We're not supposed to be subjects, right? We're not supposed to be citizens in the slave sense, right? And I understand people are very attached to this idea of citizenship. For a lot of people, it means very much to them. It's one of the main pursuits or driving, identity building components of their life. But understanding the nature of citizenship itself, I think, is a component to understanding our own sovereignty and our own power. And Ms. Klann is just one example of many others that have gone out and chosen to exercise power as the sovereigns, because we, the people of these United States of America, were made the sovereigns. That's one of the things that is so incredible about this great American experiment. For the first time in history, the power of the monarchy was placed with the people, and the governing forces, those controlling those institutions that were set in place to help guide the flow of orderly society, were made for the first time servants of the many sovereigns, right? Servants of the many individuals who had total control of their own destiny, their own land, and through an equal application of contract law and constitutional contract law, which has its basis going back as far as the Council of Constance in 1414, but that's another story for a whole other time. The equal application of that lens of law is what protected the individual, but allowed for the mass aggregation of these unions of states, right? It's these mass territories coming together, being part of a greater whole, but essentially operating autonomously until, again, that's that Civil War period of time. So looking at how that system has to change and understanding how we got to where we're at, that's the whole point, I think, of what Ms. Klann and others are trying to highlight to the people. We do have the capability to step outside of that legal fiction for one reason and one reason only. We were never given informed consent. It was not a true free will decision. It was only a partial free will decision. That's why I think that when we look at the balance of accountability here, we can only hold some of them partially accountable for their actions, right, to the greatest extent allowable through sovereign law, because some individuals operating in those antagonistic capacities against us have no idea that they're doing it. And once they're educated about that, they will come over. They will provide themselves an asset and a bulwark for the people, rather than one that is obfuscating and obstructing the people in the return to this great republic. This is not a small undertaking. When President Trump told us he was returning power to the people, I don't think anybody in the world at that time, except for maybe a select few, really truly understood the gravity of what that meant. He was ending nearly 150 years in those days of essentially total enslavement. It was over 145 years, I think, or right around. And so there was this period of time where power had never truly been vested with the people. And a great many Americans in that period of time had paid the ultimate price for this country and had no idea what they were fighting for.
No, that's terrible.
Most of those fights weren't even necessary. On the civilian side, we had a great deal of the population, all of us really, essentially, yoked into this system, usurped into this system, thrown into this system at birth or right around birth. By the time we were 7 years old, we were wholly property and a component of the business entity masquerading as the government of the United States. And when President Trump came to power, he was assisted in that ascension to power by the one institution in our society that predated the corporate business entity, and that was the military forces of the United States.
Wow. That's it's amazing, and this is part of starting to unwind, and I like the way Thomas Lynch put this, unwinding the threads around our soul and pulling ourselves up and out from under all the cords that have been wrapped around us during this whole process, making us into indentured servants or slaves of some capacity. And as more and more people wake up to these facts, the more we can begin to change things for the better. Now, as someone else mentioned here too about how many times has the Constitution been violated in the past 3 years, I wonder, well, we have to remember that the Constitution that they have is a corporate Constitution. The Constitution for the people is actually different, because all they did was change a couple words. The Constitution for the United States versus the Constitution of the United States. And how can you make such minor changes that have such impact on our sovereignty and our freedoms? I mean, the United States has been a beacon of freedom and opportunity for people for years, in spite of some of these things, but it has gone down substantially to bring us to third world country levels with what's gone on in the past few years.
It's a fascinating question that's posed here, because when we're talking about the Constitution, all of us patriots know that we're talking about the founding document. We're talking
Thank you.
about
Yeah.
the Constitution,
Sure.
for the Republic of the United States of America, right? We're talking about the initial enshrinement of our rights, the Bill of Rights, etc.
Yep.
But there was a U.S. Constitution that copied a great deal of that text, but amended a couple of things, left out a couple of other things. And that was passed as the basis of operations for their corporate bylaws. That was the establishing or founding document for their business entity. And that is the Constitution that we're often taught in our academic texts. And we're not taught that there at one point in time was a difference in constitutions, even as far as a difference in how the preamble itself was worded and written. So, and again, that's another topic for another time also. But so how many times have the Constitution been violated? Well, when we look at the Bill of Rights as our basis for the conversation, I don't think you could put a number on it really at this time. I mean, several thousand maybe. I'm not 100% sure. But what I am very sure about is that if you are a corporate business entity and you have bylaws and establishment documents that you have that give your entity the right to exist. And that's exactly what we're talking about when we talk about a corporate system. And then the board of directors or the board of trustees for that corporation, if you want to call it that, along with the entire corporate government structure, all of the executive management, if they suddenly decide that they're no longer going to follow those bylaws, that they're no longer going to behave in alignment with the founding document of the business itself is required to go along with that particular chosen path, despite how erroneous and chaotic it may be. Because again, you are subject in a maritime law system to the actions and the whims of the business entity and those who control the business entity, specifically those who control the finances of the business entity. So we can watch the business entity self-implode. We can watch the business entity, even as employees of the business entity or part of the entity, we can watch it take its own self down the tubes. And that's exactly what we've seen happen here in the world in the last 3 years. But here's where it gets really complex. The discussion isn't so simple when it pertains to living beings as resources of a business entity, right? When the business entity itself decides that it's going to self-destruct, the living beings have an honor-bound duty by nature of the fact that they are living beings to exit the business entity, to get out of the building before it all comes crashing down, to get out from underneath the weight of the financial burdens of the corpocracy that's going to come into default and collection at some point, to get out of the accountability positions that would come back on one for behavior that has done significant harm, right? So living beings have a responsibility to wake up to what's occurring with the business entity and then move from a state of being subservient or a part of that entity to being self-interested in some regard. And I think it's that very, if we can use the term from Ayn Rand, sort of this virtuous selfishness that is given to us with the Holy Spirit, and also the capacity to then transcend that and act in service with one another. It is that basis component of who we are spiritually that drives us out of a fictitious law system and into a true rules-based order that maximizes personal sovereignty, maximizes protection over the living being and the living man, and offers only those necessary constraints. And I would venture, or submit to anyone that those constraints would be innumerably less than what they are now, to ensure that everyone can be made whole and indemnified should harm be done.
Yes, that's awesome. And a great explanation, because this is a big problem, and taking it apart piece by piece is quite challenging. But once people realize how much sovereignty they've lost and why they, always are paying when they go to court, and it's a problem. The whole bar association is an issue, really, because of the corporate nature of everything, and contract and so on. So it's going to take a lot to transition this to common law, because there's a lot to unwind, like you said from the very beginning here. Just a lot to unwind. And I've heard of like seizures, for example, with law enforcement actually funding departments and so on. Well, that's not what we're not here to have them build on the backs of the American people in order to have their department. Those kinds of things have to stop. And because a lot of these seizures are theft of property. That's all there is to it, and it goes into the coffers of the state or the feds. I'm not sure exactly where, because I'm not a financial expert either, but I've heard and read a lot of things that are very, very disturbing, and if more people knew them, they would feel the same way, I'm sure.
Well, I think that's part of the nature of living within that fictitious environment and those agents of the business entity, again, not knowing what they're doing on behalf of the business entity. And that entire lens has to be reinvented in a way that balances out sovereign rights, really just the Bill of Rights in its truest sense, in its most practicable and pragmatic application, a real world application of it in the world. And then everything else, of course, I think will emanate down from that. And that's how we achieved, a limited amount of success when this first venture of the Great American Experiment actually began. That was the true orientation. There was a compass that existed in the very early days where the sovereign rights of every man, woman, and child were protected, and yet the interests of the group, to include their property, their valuables, etc., were also all protected to a pretty great degree, a degree that made everybody very happy and led to the rise of one of the strongest economies on planet Earth's history, if not the strongest, in less than 200 years. So moving to that particular common law system, moving back to the basis of how commerce, trade, value exchange, application of the law in a legal sense, courts of justice rather than courts of law, moving back to a system that's appropriately balanced is an educational journey first, because all of us are essentially going back to school. We're having to learn what the true history was, what the true activities were, how they actually accomplished this, what the remedy is, what's been said about this before, what case law were we not taught in law school that actually applies to this. There are thousands of cases about income tax, for example. There are thousands of cases about things like property rights, and to the extent the government can go to things, but we're only taught a small swath. We're only taught a segment, and it's a segment that always amplifies, of course, the narrative and the agenda of those that have control of the institutions. That's why this period of time that we're in is so pivotally important, because it's not just about reclaiming our institutions. It's not just about putting Trump back in office, right? It's not just about getting retribution and justice for the accountability, and the accountability for the things that have happened around the world in the last 3 to 5 years. It's about reshaping the institutions and the structures that we live under socially, that we have in society as a whole, so that our future as a species is much more enjoyable and far more balanced with the love of God than it has ever been before.
Yes. Well, one of the things that look at what has happened as a result of the for-profit nature of these corporations in the last 3 or 4 years. Look how many people have died because of it. This was premeditated. It was planned, and they lied, and people died and are still dying. And so that's a major issue with the corporate nature of everything. And just as an example, have you heard about the writ of mandamus that has been filed in Florida with the Attorney General? I think I can show
I have
it.
not.
Oh, here, you're going to like this. Here it is. Let me share this with you. The Supreme Court, wait a minute. Let me get back here, and there it is. Okay, so can you read that? Do I have to make it bigger? Let me make it bigger.
Indeed. Writ of mandamus to halt bioweapon. Incredible.
Isn't that awesome? I just, wow. So there are people in Florida that are working hard to get this to change. So this is on Rumor Mill News, if you, for anybody out there that might want to see it. And there's a show to go with it with Karen Kingston, the whistleblower, and Stu Peters. So I'm sure that's worth your time. And let me stop sharing that one. And I would like to show you something else. I'm not going to say much about it, but I'm just going to share it. And that one is, oh, well, maybe I should, people might not know what a writ of mandamus is. And so I hope I'm saying that correct. But anyway, a writ of mandamus is an order from a court to an inferior government official, ordering the government official to properly fulfill their official duties, or correct an abuse or discretion. It's an extraordinary remedy which should only be used in exceptional circumstances peculiar to public importance. And the importance publicly is obviously very important because, like I said before, people lied and people died. So there's one more that I'd like to share real quick that you might also find of interest. I'm not going to say anything about this one, but it's something you might want to look into. Wait a minute, where am I? Exclusive cutoff. This is really disturbing. This woman, this is on X and a couple other places. And this woman was actually told to euthanize patients and how to do it. And this happened mainly in the elderly. So I'm going to stop sharing that one. But also, one more I'll share, and then I'll stop sharing. And I know it's be time for you to go. As a matter of fact, if you would like to make some final comments, I know you're on a very busy schedule. We can leave it at that, and I can show these afterwards.
Well, I'd be happy to. And, I guess my final comments are that the entirety of our discussion today is purposed for one major reason, right? It's so everybody can get essentially a crash course lecture into what actually happened, so that a remedy can be derived from that. We can't devise the solution until we understand the nature of the problem, because we can prevent the problem from occurring again by tailoring a solution that specifically covers the various loopholes that were created, the various facades that were allowed to ingratiate themselves into actual real levers of power and real pulpits of decision making here in our country and in all of the Commonwealth realms in the Western world. Essentially, any government that fell under the control of the Rothschild central banking model and the British Crown in some form or another exemplified this exact same type of corporate fiction, this fictitious entity. It's why the founders recognized it in the early days and devised the Declaration and the original Bill of Rights in such a fashion to limit that to a great degree. So understanding it allows us to have the conversation to devise something new and something better. And that is where things like this conversation today are going to inevitably lead us. And why is that? We're not going to leave this type of world for our children when we fully understand what's happening here. It would be no different than, having shots fired on your ranch in the late 18th century and understanding that your home and your property was being invaded. And so some response was going to be necessary to preserve and protect your life, your liberty, the liberty and life of your children and your family. And that is sort of what spawned off the American Revolution, right? We had a number of different moments that led up to that, but it was really the point of acceptance with certain segments of the population in those days that if they continued in the path they continued on, they were never going to have any liberty. They were never going to have any true decision-making power. They were never going to be able to govern themselves and preserve their progeny and their family into the future. And so something had to be done right here, right now, in that day and in that time. And we're exactly in the same area as a society now that we were in those days, except this time we have a full understanding, or a much broader understanding is maybe a better way to say it, of what has actually occurred here and how this control matrix works. So this time, and I think what is going to be a mostly bloodless way, and understanding that there are casualties of war, and that's another discussion for another time. I'm not trying to diminish that, but in a mostly bloodless way, in a more Gandhi-inspired way, if we want to call it that, or a more Christ-like way is even a better way to say it. We're going about destroying the old system in a way that it cannot rise. It cannot reinvent itself. It does not have a safe house around the rest of the world. There is no hidey hole left, right? For once and for the first time, I think, in our history, we have the genuine upper hand. So all we have to do is bring ourselves up to speed with our information, our knowledge, and our awareness, and then utilize that to change the world.
And keep moving forward. Well, thank you so much, SG. And if you have to depart, go ahead. I'm just going to say a few more things, and then I'll wind up this presentation. And you did a wonderful job of explaining where we are at in regard to our courts and justice system. And that's one big thing to unwrap. So we kind of got the surface area of it covered. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. Have a good day, everyone. I look forward to coming back. Stay safe.
Thank you, SG. Okay, I'm going to just show you one other thing I wanted to share my screen with you about. You can look some of these things up for your own information because I think you'll want to. Okay, share. These are just a few of the things that I received in my email today. Not that I want to share my email necessarily, but there's some very good articles out there that explain a lot of things that are going on that are very concerning, and that if you have children, you need to be aware of what they are doing. And many times they just don't tell us. So let me scroll this a little bit, and you can read it. Look at what Dr. Mike Yeadon says. It was a fictitious disease. The crime of the century. Elderly secretly euthanized. That's what we talked about. Premeditated. Genocide. See, these are all articles out there. Dr. Michael Yeadon, every single thing we were told is a lie. We have got to tell our friends and neighbors and whoever, so everybody gets on board about this, because your life could be, it's a matter of living or not living. Let me put it that way. And I'm sure everybody wants to live. Now, I usually don't do this much. Yeah, exactly. The murders were not fictitious. And if they were one of your family members and you know this, I would be pretty upset myself. And I know that my parents were probably contributed to their demise at a younger time than normally would have. But one of the things I'd like to bring up is I have two products that, well, actually I have more than two. I have three, which I consider a foundational thing if you can get them. One is the SuperPatch, which is a drug-free product that you can use, and it covers a number of different areas. And then there's also this product, which is relatively new, and I think it's of critical importance. It could actually save lives because it detoxifies you, and it's a very special type of zeolite that is complexed with marine plasma, which none of the other ones are. And the test results we're seeing from this are absolutely phenomenal. And I tried to, put some of this on Facebook, and they took it down. So this is the hard part about getting information out to people, is they censor everything and they take channels down, and it's challenging. It really is challenging. So I would encourage you to try some of these products. I think you would find them very beneficial. I'm using them. Those two in particular, and one other one, the more Mito product. They're all in the description here. But I'm not here I didn't start out ever being as a product pusher or whatever, but it's the only way I can keep going at this point in time, because the commissions on products are not that big. And so unless you have, 100,000 followers, which I don't. So that's always an issue. And then, donations and so on. But nobody likes asking for that. I'm anxiously waiting for the new system to come in. So no, it will no longer be necessary to have to ask anything. And yes, Facebook, they're terrible. So is YouTube, they're bad too. They're operating as the enemy of we the people. That's all there is to it. Yeah, you see some stuff up there because they have to. They couldn't, can't eliminate everything, but they skew everything as well. So I do my best to bring information forward to you that I think will actually help you and your family, because we have to stick together. People of the light need to back each other up. They need to work together to change this into the world that we really want it to be, as ordained by our infinite creator, who has a name, Yeshua, Yahuwah, and Yeshua, I should say. That's the best way. Yahuwah being the Almighty One, and Yeshua being the Son. So anyway, that's another area for you to look into. But anyway, thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you again soon. And we will keep bringing forward whatever information I think you want to know. So for now, thank you for being here, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.
We have found our way. It's a brand new day, and we'll be making history. Are you with me? Won't you stay? We have come so far. This is who we are, and like the rising sun, we have just begun to play our part. This is the time we form the chorus. Lift your voice for those before us. We can rely on one another. Feel the pride, let's show our colors. We are heroes and dreamers. We are restless believers, stronger than ever. Never say never. Don't look back now, don't look back now. Rise up, stand with each other. We are sisters and brothers, finding our place and running the race. We'll take our chance and seize the moment. Hold on tight and don't let go of all your hopes and dreams that light the way. We control our fate, destiny awaits.